やばい、史上最高に広い。
So preparation time has expired. Welcome to the semi-final. So we have Love Sexy Madakimetenai on the government, and on the opposition, 愛しとるけぇ、黙っとられんちゃねー。I don't know how to pronounce it. So let me call upon Prime Minister to open cases in 7 minutes. Take care. The motion is, this House believes that search engines such as Google should not manipulate search results based on moral or ethical concerns regarding the opinions expressed in queries or web pages.
Google isn't only for a specific group of people, right? It's a search engine that everyone uses, and everyone of different ideologies, everyone of different opinions uses to formulate what they believe their beliefs should be, what they believe is the right thing to do within the society. We think that because of the fact that there are so many vast ways to actually interpreting what morality is, what is ethically correct. We think that Google should show every single form of those moralities, and through that they should have the people who are using these forums, viewers using these queries, to actually be able to see those different kinds and decide for themselves. We're going to talk about two things coming from Prime Minister. We're first going to talk about what exactly search engines are, but furthermore why Google doesn't have the authority to dictate. But secondly, we're going to talk about the benefits of morality by having this kind of non-manipulation. Before that, let's go on to the model coming from government side. So first off, we don't think that just because of this, that means that we're going to show like illegal things, right? If it is banned by your government for the individual countries, then it isn't going to be shown. Things like, for example, how to make bombs. Things like, for example, killing people, murdering people. Ways that are obvious harms, that are obvious bads, are going to not be shown because of the fact that they must always comply with the government. The law is always at utmost priorities, even if you are a private entity, right? But secondly, what exactly are these web page queries, right? We think that first of all, they tend to be very public websites that are accessible through Google, meaning the fact that anyone can put their opinion, that any form of ideology can be seen in the comment section. And we think that because it's expressed in comments, it means that all these web pages are going to have comment sections within them, right? But furthermore, what kind of things are we currently see being manipulated? We think that first of all, manipulation is the idea that you first of all can't see it, that it's not being shown, and it's completely censored, or you have to scroll down 60 times or 70 times, which no one really has the time to do unless you're really people. So, but furthermore, what kind of things are being censored right now? We think that things are fairly controversial, things like animal abuse, things like, for example, the fact that considering Google is a very liberal company, they tend to censor things like anti-abortion as well. We don't think that's right, and we don't think that it's ethically not right for Google to do. Now, why is that? First of all, let's talk about the role of search engines. We think that search engines, and specifically Google and Bing, for example, they advertise themselves, they put it in their CSR, and they make it their company logo, that they are a forum of expression, right? Meaning the fact that they advertise themselves, and the entity as themselves, the search engine is built on the idea to provide people with the most vast amount of information. And that's why Google updates their servers every single day and adds new forums, adds new queries every single day, right? Because of that, we think that because of the fact that they advertise themselves, but furthermore base themselves on the idea that they will give you the most vast amount of information, it's based on the idea that they want you to make your choices, they want you to make your opinions based on an educated and informed choice, right? But furthermore, we think what's going to come from opposition side is the idea that, but it's their company rights, they're a private company, right? We think that that's not true when it comes to the public forum. Even if you are a private company, the public rules and the public forum are two different things, right? Meaning the fact that even if you are Google, you can't actually censor Facebook because of the fact that it's a different entity, but furthermore, it is a public good, and because of that, company rights do not actually work in those cases. Within those forms, it's going to be done in this motion. But let's talk more specifically exactly as to why Google doesn't have the authority to dictate and decide what contents can be seen. We think for two main reasons. First of all, the idea of the fact that there's no agreement on what exactly morality is and what exactly is ethical, right? We think that there always should be a discussion or a discourse based on different views, based on people maybe from the far right, from the far left, deciding on what they believe is moral, and through that actually having a proper amount of discourse. Now, why do we think that discourse is so important? First of all, because of the fact that as a society, you must be able to incorporate different amounts of views, and furthermore, actually be able to make that kind of idea. But furthermore, we think that through discourse, you are actually able to make a more reliable view, one that can be constructed from many different points of people, and through that, a more absolute point of ethical or morality, right? But secondly, the idea that Google is very likely to be very liberal, right? We know that from Google, the CEO is a very liberal person, but furthermore, the company is one that is publicly democratic. It is one that has publicly supported very liberal views through all of campaign season, through many years of politics, right? Through that, what happens because of that is that Google means that they are very pro-immigration. They are very pro-choice, right? Meaning the fact that what is currently happening through that is that they are manipulating the ideas like anti-abortion. They are manipulating ideas like, for example, anti-immigrant people, right? What happens because of that is two main harms. First, what happens because of that, why do we think that is so unjust, right? We think that people who are actually in real life anti-abortion are therefore unable to actually get the information that they need to fuel their campaigns. And we think that considering the fact that there is no absolute ban when it comes to things like abortion, when it comes to things like, for example, immigrants, all rights, all parties, all opinions should have that right to access that information to fuel their campaign, to fuel what they believe is right, because that exactly is what democracy is. But furthermore, that exactly is what Google proves to be. But furthermore, what exactly is this morality and how does it improve it? POS.
Regardless of whatever you say that people love to use it, does not mean it's a public good, but it is a private good. Why, given that Google is an individual company, if you're allowed to think what kind of expression and discourse should happen in society, are not allowed to manipulate in a way that they want?
So Google in and of itself is a private good, and that's why they can actually filter different things within their own search page, right? However, they are not, what this motion is doing, meaning the fact that you go into each of the forums and you censor each of the comments within that forum, right? And that in and of itself is a public good. But if it is not a public good, it's a private entity of a different website or a different company. Meaning the fact that Google shouldn't be able to breach out of its own private rights and then kind of like reach onto different ones and leech out of that privacy going on there. That's exactly what happens to this motion. Furthermore, how does this make morality very bad? What happens because of this is that people become unaware that people on the far right, people who do make unethical claims, do not exist, right? And because of that, first of all, on the webpage, they cannot fight back to these people and even try and engage them and understand why they are thinking that and trying to change it. But even more, when they meet these people in society, which they inevitably have to, because you can't censor people out of your daily lives, they can't be able to counter these people properly. They won't be able to know how to deal with them, combat them properly, and actually try and change those people if they do think that they are so immoral. But secondly, morality is only understood if you actually understand what immorality is. You cannot understand animal abuse if you don't understand what animal abuse is, how these people think, how they think that these little puppies who are like really cute should be killed, should be drowned, should be cut down, right? You can only understand the good of morality and why it should be something valued when you realize how evil immorality is, how it is so sickening, it is something that we need to fix. At the end of the day, first of all, there is no company rights here, considering the fact that they are breaching into other privacy rights. But furthermore, morality is also something that we strive for. It can only be done through diversity and through our paradigm. We're very happy to post.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Next, I call on leader of the opposition, Keke.
two key things in this debate. First of all, we think on the side of the house that there are certain ideology which is absolutely unjustifiable from the perspective of anyone. And secondly, we are going to prove to you that the Google, which to some extent has public aspect, is capable actor enough to judge this legitimacy of the idea. So based on this framework, I'm going to provide you two key arguments from leader of the opposition. Firstly, we are going to talk about how minority people or people who belong to certain identity or people who are believing in certain ideology will feel oppressed by the offensive remarks or discriminatory remarks in the internet. And second of all, I'd like to talk about why the private research engines or those sort of private companies should have the right to select what kind of information they are going to provide with its customers. But before that, simple or several points of clarification regarding our model, including the rebuttals to their side of the house. So, under our model, we accept that what kind of information will be provided to its consumers or people should be up to the decision of the company at the end of the day. But we think that it is to some extent reasonable for our side to assume that these Googles or those of companies delete content, mainly delete content which includes discrimination or offensive remarks that attacks minority groups on the basis of gender, ethnicity, religion, race, disability, sexuality, all those sort of things. And we think that these kinds of ideas are certainly absolutely unjustifiable from the perspective of anyone. And that's also the case that they have to defend on their side of the house. And we think that it's reasonable for us to assume that, especially their side has conceded that Google or those of institutions have to some extent public aspect. When they are conceding that, we think that it's quite possible that these Googles are somehow caring about the legitimacy of information or those of issues. And the proposition side has been worried about the rampant usage or abuse of this system by the Google. Like it might go to the extent that it sends an ambiguous area or controversial area because Google is too liberal actors. But we think that if the kind of information that is provided is not so offensive and there might be the room to have a rational discussion, then we think that other people correcting that idea shown in the website is the benefit of the Google at the end of the day. Therefore, we think that Google does not necessarily have so active incentive to rampantly use or abuse this system. No, thank you, not yet. Moving on to our first point about how minority people or people who belong to certain identity will feel oppressed by the offensive remarks in the website. So, what kind of mental damage exactly minority groups will have by seeing this kind of image? For example, when these minority groups of people, for example, the refugees, see the comment like they have to go back to their own country or they have to go, they have to die because they are murdered or they are rapists or so forth. Then, for example, they might feel fear or they might come to distrust other people and they feel the sense of isolation, like I'm different from the other people in this mainstream community or so forth. Or for example, if women see the comments like women are inferior to men or those sort of comments, then they might lose confidence or they might be suffering from the sense of self-denial or they might blame themselves. So why we think it is bad? Firstly, because we think that the sense of oppression that these individuals feel under their side of the house itself cannot be accepted. But second of all, we think that if these certain groups of people are afraid of this kind of assault that they might be facing when they are accessing to the internet, these people might lose incentive to access to the search engine itself in cases where they search about the sensitive issues in which offensive remark might appear in the websites. And we think as a result of that, individuals lose opportunity to access to various kinds of information which Google should provide. And it's also bad from the perspective of the obligation of the Google, because they conceded that the obligation of the Google is to provide the various information with the people inside in society. So before moving on to the next point. Yes.
So I'm a bit confused. You said that there's no need to censor things because check and balances work so much, and people will defend these minorities so much. But then why is censorship necessary to begin with if check and balance is so strong?
Because if the information provided in certain websites goes to extent that it is too discriminative or too irrational, then there is almost no room for discussion, and the people who expressing that idea would not listen to the idea expressed in that kind of website. Then we think that minority people or those people who belong to certain identity will surely feel oppressed. So that's why we think that companies should have the legitimacy to delete that kind of content. Moving on to the second point about why companies should have the right to select what kind of information they are going to provide. So, two level of analysis here. Firstly, we believe that even these research engines are private institutions or profit-driven entities. So, just in the same way as companies are usually allowed to decide what kind of services they provide, the search engines should be given the autonomy about what kind of information they are going to provide. They say that discourse is important, but we think that there are many ways in which we can create discourse other than the internet. For example, mass media or those sort of institutions might be able to create discourse under cyber attack. Therefore, we do not necessarily think that these research engines should be imposed that kind of responsibility to begin with. But secondly, even if we accept that these institutions have public aspect as their site right to characterize, we think that there is certain ideology which is absolutely unjustifiable, like the discriminatory remark or so forth. They say that companies have no right to decide what's right or wrong, right and wrong. But we think that no one should have the right to discriminate people just based on ethnicity, sexuality, or those sort of things. And also, Google should be accountable for even these minority groups of people. Therefore, we think that deleting the content including discriminatory remarks should be done by these institutions. That's why we think.
Thank you, Gil, for the position. I'm more up on the Prime Minister.
So, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to talk about, I'm going to do two things in my speech. Firstly, I'm going to respond to this to the case, and secondly, I'm going to further enhance the argument about how, given the public aspects of the Google, or the fact that Google or other search engines are providing a public forum, it is legitimate for the government to adopt this policy and do not allow them to manipulate the search results and the contents which appear on their forum. But so on my first issue, which is about the response to their substantive. Now they talked about how, for example, the hate speech or the other sorts of offensive remarks, for example, offense for the religion, should not be shown on the search results, and therefore Google should be allowed to manipulate those contents or delete those contents. But Mr. Speaker, we don't think it is the role of the search engines to the role of the search engine companies to adjudicate what sort of expression or what sort of content should be allowed in public. We think it is the role of the state to adjudicate, Mr. Speaker, what sort of expression, what sort of speech should be allowed in public, Mr. Speaker. Because the state, Mr. Speaker, is the one which is entrusted by the whole society to adjudicate what sort of expression should be allowed or what conduct should be allowed. Because there's always a tension between the freedom of expression and also the harms that it talks about, which stems from the speech or which stems from the expression. And that is the reason why we have we always have a controversy or debate about, for example, the regulation of speech, like hate speech law, for example, the law regarding the offense to religion. And therefore, given that we are talking about the balance of two important interests, Mr. Speaker, we don't think we can just allow some private actors to make very important the adjudication about the clash or the balance of two interests. We think it should be the role of the state because the state is entrusted by the citizens, and furthermore, the state is voted by the citizens, and therefore the state is in the place to reflect the public opinion, and therefore that balance or that consideration should be done by the state. We think it's never justified to entrust a private entity to make that adjudication, which is so important, which have a massive impact on the society, as the Prime Minister explained, and therefore that's the reason why we think the argument falls, because that's not the role, that should not be the role of the search engines to make that sort of adjudication to delete the contents at the end of the day. But Mr. Speaker, so let me give you the other reason why the argument is wrong, because we think that, for example, the reason why we don't always it depends on countries, but we don't always regulate the speech. For example, the kind of speech that they talked about is because, Mr. Speaker, there is a counter discourse, and the counter discourse is extremely important because let's look at the reality. We don't think it is only the internet that the minority people, people who belong to the minority, face the discriminatory or offensive remarks. They hear it, for example, in the real life, unfortunately, or for example, they hear it in the TV because there are people who are extreme or people who are not sensitive to their sentiment, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, given the fact that it happens anyway, regardless of the censorship done by Google and other companies, it is much better for us to have a discourse that make people realize, especially the people who are in the middle, to realize that it is wrong to discriminate against them, or it is wrong to offend those people who belong to the minority, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, we think it is important to sustain the public forum in which we can have a public discussion about, Mr. Speaker, whether it is how it is wrong to offend the people, how it is wrong to discriminate against the people, because it happens in reality, even outside those internet as a forum. We think this is important. And they might say that, for example, there are other avenues to have a discussion, but we think the role of the internet is extremely huge in this day and age, Mr. Speaker. Because we use internet day in and day out. We use, for example, internet through smartphone, and therefore it is something that we can most casually use. It is the most accessible forum. It is the most accessible avenue in which the public discourse can occur, Mr. Speaker. Even people who do not read the newspaper and engage in the deliberatory process about whether or not the speech should be allowed, access the internet, Mr. Speaker. For example, when you look at the when you look at the internet, you might happen to find the articles, you might happen to find, for example, the movies, Mr. Speaker, about, for example, the anti-abortion campaigns or the other controversial moral issues. And therefore, we think because of its high accessibility, and also the information can easily expand on the internet, Mr. Speaker. The kind of contents which are drawing attention on the internet, Mr. Speaker, quickly expand, Mr. Speaker. That is also the uniqueness of the internet. And therefore, even if it's not the exclusive forum in which public discourse can occur, given the importance or the significance of the internet as a public forum in which the discourse can occur, we say that we don't think that their primary argument about the Google having the ability to delete the content and therefore silence the remarks, Mr. Speaker, is something it's something that has been justified. I take a point.
If certain minority feels uncomfortable by seeing certain messages or words, and when they feel uncomfortable going into the query itself, don't you think that deprives the opportunity to make them go into the query and therefore make an expression itself?
I don't really understand his view why, but the internet is so highly useful and necessary in their daily business, or for example in their daily life, even outside the business, for example, to communicate with other people. And therefore we don't buy the argument that people are going to be so afraid that they will stop using the internet. We don't think that is going to happen in the vast majority of cases in reality. So, Mr. Speaker, we say moving on to the next issue, which is about how, given the public nature of Google and other companies, we think it is justified to adopt this policy. We say that even though the private companies are doing something, we think the state is justified to intervene in their right to free economic activity. For example, the transportation. Although transportation is run by the private company in many cases, the state does regulate. For example, the state does not allow certain drivers to run taxis because the transportation is publicly important. We think that there are lots of other examples. We think that is applicable to the Google and other companies, what they're doing, because basically they're providing a public forum, as I explained, which is important, in which the public discourse can occur, and also people can potentially change their opinions about important issues like animal cruelty, anti-abortion, or for example, the stance toward immigration. And therefore we think, given the importance of the internet, given that it has a social public impact, Mr. Speaker, we think the state has every right to intervene when it's necessary and when it's proportionate, when it's not unreasonable. We told you how it is reasonable. Now, we told you how it is reasonable intervention by the state. Now, they told us that Google does not rampantly delete contents. But Mr. Speaker, how can you make the assumption when, for example, Google is, for example, a liberal company, the CEO of the Google is really liberal, and for example, when the content is deleted, vast majority of the public do not even realize that content has been deleted because they don't see it in the first place in many cases. For example, people who might think about posting something self-censor because they know that they are going to be censored by the Google anyway, therefore they are going to stop it in the first place. For these reasons, we think that there's a high chance that Google is going to abuse their system, and we think given the harm, we think we need to intervene in their freedom because that's necessary, that's justifiable, and therefore it's really proposed.
Thanks, the Prime Minister. Next, I call upon the leader of the opposition.
As a deputy leader of opposition, firstly, I'm going to reinforce the principal point given to you by Hiramото-kun, and I'm going to explain how Google, being a private company, is allowing it to have run its company based on its own kind of values, and how even if we concede to the values given as proposed by Sayaka-chan, it is still in the interest of this educated choice and more rational information for Google to censor some types of information. And secondly, I'm going to engage to their points about discourse. So they say discourse is important. However, we doubt the point that every discourse is worth knowing. And I'm going to also engage to Tominaga-san's point about counter-discourse. Thirdly, I'm going to talk about their harms. Okay. So firstly about the principle, right? Google is a private company, so simply our principle is that as a company, they have the right to kind of design how their products is used in society, right? And they have the right to decide what kind of service they want to provide to the society. And individual case, how they deal with the individual case is up to the company to decide. They simply say that because the societal influence is so huge, the state can intervene. However, that is only an assertion in the first place. And secondly, they say that the societal influence is so huge. However, that's not really true, right? Google doesn't totally decide what kind of discourse happens and not happen inside society, right? It is just one search engine, and even if Google censors it on other forums or webpages, people can still speak out, and it is not censorship by the state. It is a totally different thing. Google is just inside the capacity of the service that it provides, lessening the probability of people reaching that kind of information because Google believes that is not the good information, right? And also, they say the harm is too big. That's the reason to intervene. However, that is not applicable to every case. We believe that Google is the one that should decide in every case the way, the harms, and the benefits of exposing that information to the public. So that is why we believe we leave it up to the Google to decide. And also about Google, they want to provide more and more information for people to make educated choice. However, if you say it's for educated choice, that is the reason that why it's legitimate for them to choose the most fit information that they believe is desirable, right? Because Google says that they want to provide as much information as possible. However, they do not say that they're going to disclose every
information. They have the right to decide how much they want to supply the information and to what extent and what kind of discourse they want to cause inside the society. We believe that is also in the capacity of Google. And the government side is the one that is by forcing Google to disclose every kind of information, like enabling them to reach their goal of educated choice, right? And also about the public forums, for example, Facebook, right? That is inside their private company capacity. However, Google's job is leading people up to seeing that information. So if Google changes and manipulates that process of leading people into accessing that information, that is not infringing on the public forum or other companies, right? That is still in the realm of private companies. So with that being said, I'm going to move on to the discourse idea. So Saito-chan said that when people see as many different ideas as possible, then they can put those ideas into one and then make a more reliable idea. However, we doubt that that will happen, right? Because what kind of opinions are going to be manipulated under our paradigm? That is if you think about the kind of opinion that is not too offensive, for example, animal abuse about facts or that is educational for people, then Google is unlikely to censor all of those, right? They're exaggerating the problem. People still have a chance to know about what kind of animal abuse is happening or what kind of discrimination happened. However, they're not going to access the information saying that all black people should die, right? So when we think about the cases that the company go to such an extent to, even liberal companies that value open discussion, they go to such an extent to censor or manipulate those ideas, then those are the things that people, the second they see it, they feel repulsive or they feel emotionally attacked. They have this very visceral reaction. Those kind of opinions are going to be censored. That means that what kind of reaction is going to happen? The Saito-chan talked about rationally gathering all the information and idea to form more reliable opinion. That's not true, right? When black people or immigrants see those kind of attacking comments on forums, then their reaction is going to be firstly run away from that page because they just don't want to see it and they feel hurt, or secondly maybe they feel attacked so they become more aggressive. So the kind of discourse that happens at best is attacking people being more divided and attacking each other. So the beautiful process of organic kind of gathering the information and idea is never going to happen under their side. And also about the counter discourse point given by Tominaga-san, he talked about how because it's the internet, it's easier for minorities to fight back. However, precisely because it's the internet, it's easier to spread, right? So that is why our harms is also easier to spread. That is why it's illegitimate for the government to say that Google should just sit there and watch this harm spread even if they don't believe in this. And also about the middle people realizing the problem, right? These people can still realize the problem of discrimination and other things through education, right? It is more realistic and it's wrong to offend people. This idea, in order for people to realize that it's wrong to offend people, we don't need many people being exposed to blunder and discriminating comments, right? So this discourse, because it's not likely to be fruitful, we do not believe their case stands.
Okay, you only talked about the people who receive offensive comments. However, think about the people in the middle or others. Don't you think those people have a chance to change their mind? Or for example, people who oppose that offensive comments have a chance to admonish others so that those people will stop discriminating against the minority.
Okay, so you talk about the people who see the comments but are not directly attacked, right? So when you are neutral about some kind of neutral about a political opinion, and you see some people who are from the extreme saying that there should be 0 immigrants in Japan or something like that, you think that that opinion is so extreme that that is not worth rebutting, or you feel apathetic because you think that that page is nonsense, right? Because you want to engage in more fruitful discourse. You think that that page is just discriminative and just violent, right? So that is why these people are not going to spend the time to rebut on those pages, or maybe they feel that it is too rude and they feel enraged anyway. So there is not going to be a cool and rational discussion in those pages, right? So about the harms that they talked about these people not knowing that there are discriminated people in daily life, just because there are discriminated people and those events occurring in daily life, that is why on other platforms, for example, media or newspaper, they have the chance to combat those ideas. It doesn't have to be anonymous always to combat other ideas, right? So that is why we believe that it's in the right of private companies such as Google to design the service that they want to provide for society, and also the harms. That's why we're very proud to oppose.
figure, there's a fact of disagreement. Even though all individuals believe that morality and ethical principles exist, they disagree over what morality and ethical principles are correct ones. Right? If one party determines that this is a correct moral principle and ignore the others who have different reasonable views about morality and make those others unable to share their opinions on public forum, that would be an autocratic disrespect for a person's moral status, because one's moral status depends on their being heard. Here comes a key in this debate. The search engines purport to create forums for expressions about morality and ethical principles, and the principal assumption for them must be the value of expression themselves. And expressions matter for those under reasonable disagreement, all of them. And if search engine suppresses them, then there is a performance contradiction within the search engine's business itself. They vindicate expressions, they don't vindicate discourses. So this is a abhorrent hindrance to people's effective enjoyment of free expressions, and that's why we want to propose this motion. So there are two key issues in this debate. Firstly, do the corporations operating search engines have the obligation not to do this? And secondly, whose legitimate interest is at stake? So first of all, the key premise to be fixed in this debate is that search engines have the ability to control the general flow of discourses, because those forums and queries are now the main forum for people, and those fora can be worked as fora only when accessed. So given this, we told you that the business of search engines is no longer an entity, is no longer a business in the private sphere. From the Prime Minister we have told you. And opposition side said that discrimination and offensive remarks, clearly offensive remarks, may well be decided as clearly immoral. So, we question, then why is it that not all those remarks are officially regulated by the state, right? So here, we are asking what right of expression should be respected and by who, right? There are 2 points here. We can determine improper contents only if the decision making itself is authorized, right? That's why hate speeches are not a matter of informal regulation, but are a matter of the formal legislation and administration, right? And second, we again question, do Google or search engines, those search engines, have as much authority as the official political procedures? We say no, because the Google is only a part of the democratic society which involves the fact of reasonable disagreement, right? So we think there's no ground on the opposition side to say that because this is private, then Google can do whatever they want to do. So then they say the corporations can provide whatever service they like from the leader of opposition. And also opposition, we've said expressions and opinions are private goods. Firstly, we don't think so, right? They are the basic resources without which the public discourse couldn't operate any longer. They are between the private and the public, and if that good is effectively enjoyed, if that good is not effectively enjoyed by individuals, that's infringement upon the right to expression and right to political discourses in informal way. And secondly, even if expression is a private good, still, that is a right to be recognized, right? The society should form a background condition to make even those private rights, enjoyment of those private rights, and those enjoyment of private rights should be made effective by the society's frameworks, and that will be violated under their paradigm. So, then, they said there is a clear case of morally unjustifiable remarks, especially discriminatory remarks. Now, as long as the Google is not only judging that the remarks are discriminatory, but also affecting the right of individuals to expression, they are affecting the public distribution of legitimate rights and duties. We say this is not a function of informal actors like Google or private companies, right? So, this is the basic ground by which we think that Google or search engines do not have any role in doing that, right? And secondly, even discriminatory remarks can make positive contribution to discourses, right? From the Deputy Prime Minister, we told you that it's not the case that the victims are alone, right? The clearly discriminatory remarks can be objected to by others, right? So we think there is no necessity in so much vindicating the company's private interests and private rights. So finally, whose legitimate interest is at stake in this debate? The first point coming from the opposition side is that Google wouldn't abuse it. It is because Google isn't some malicious actor, right? So we think it's not about whether Google's will is sincere, whether it is not about whether Google is so malicious actor or not. It is about the disagreements about morality and ethical principles. Even if Google makes all the sincere efforts to mitigate their abuse, Google doesn't know whether what is clearly morally unjustifiable remarks, right? What if the decision maker believes that animal rights issue is already beyond disagreement? They don't think or even imagine that, for example, whaling or fishing workers are sincerely defending the opportunity of economic activity for themselves. And liberals will say whalers are all crazy, right? The liberals might also say, to mention Diero's example, anti-immigrationists are all crazy. Liberals are saying that, right? And there's no guarantee that Google will misunderstand the, sorry. There's no guarantee that Googles are understanding this nature of disagreement, right? They are in disagreement and they don't know it, right? That's why Google shouldn't use their own resources for their operation, right? Operation to suppress the opinions. So it's not about Google's maliciousness, but about disagreement. And finally, they said minority will feel isolated. I'll deal with the POI from the opposition with discriminatory remarks affect the very effectiveness for minorities to access queries. So let's be comparative on this. Our paradigm doesn't make minorities' participation utterly unfeasible. Usually, queries and forums have conflicting parties debating, and knowing that there are those empathic to the minority, their psychological pressure is not that high. On the other hand, opposition's case is not a matter of psychological pressure, right? But the radically minded people cannot access those informations in any way. And secondly, again, even if discriminatory remarks are that serious, it is not the job of Google to decide who should enjoy what kind of right to expression. And finally, also, it's not the majority themselves who can access the forums. It is also the minorities who can access these forums to counter the majority, to counter those discriminationist opinions, right? What if the minority wants to take part in forum and object to discriminators? They can't answer to any of these persons, right? Because these minorities themselves cannot access the forum and cannot object to the discrimination. So we think this Google's custom is not effective. It's not good for anyone, and for these reasons,
Thanks, comment, please, for your speech. Next, I brought up also Susume. THBT.
As usual, government would try to distract you from the core by doing the beauty of rhetorics, by telling you that we should give ground to the moral respect. Well, no, it's a compliment. But the core that we have to look at is, we're not talking about states should prohibit expressions or not. We're talking about whether corporations, which is not a public actor, which has nothing to do with public entity, which is just a simple private actor, should be restricted the right of free speech in order to sacrifice their right to support a bit marginal benefit of the free speech right to other people who want to make weird, discriminatory, unrealistic, insulting remarks. We don't think that exists, and they have failed to tell us why this free speech should extend to the right, we should limit the rights of corporations in any way, also make them allow them to make a free speech. I'll talk about two things. One, which side can provide better forms of expression or any other benefit, for example, prevention of harms, posting, whatsoever. Second, is it justifiable to coerce search engines not to manipulate their research results? Firstly, so let's look at the idea of benefits and harm comparisons. Firstly, so Reasonable opposition told you that this is a case, there are cases when certain speeches makes harm to individuals. It could be minority, it could be immigrants. It depends on case by case. They told us, one, these hate speech kind of things or offensive remarks happen in society anyway, so we should deal with it. Firstly, the fact that that exists in society does not mean we should minimize the harms, right? Or if the harm exists, or if we can minimize it, we should do it. Secondly, they have considered that harm exists by saying, well, that happens, so we should do it other ways, right? So they have considered the harm exists. And secondly, they told us this, harm should happen because we can actually deal with it in a public forum by other people attacking it. Firstly, well, I wasn't quite sure why just by other people saying we should do something and you're saying wrong can convince people and can heal the harms that the minority are receiving in the status quo, right? So we aren't quite sure how to convince them. Well, I think that in some cases that might happen, but in other cases that doesn't happen, right? Some people just keep sticking to their opinions, right? Not fit. So I wasn't quite sure how that is going to be effective. So we think now that we have told you that this harm actually proves that this minority may have a possibility that they have to be infected of the harm. That's one. But two, that is not the only harm that's going to happen from a lack of counter speech or hate speech, right? As I have told you in POI, when some minority thinks that, well, I want to look at this query, I want to look at these forums, web pages, but there might be a discriminatory remarks that I do not like, which might be offended. There might be a comment that I do not like. That person has to be fair, and that person has to go away from entering into the discussion into the queries to make a peaceful discussion, want to protect an opposition. But Tominaga-san's response was, well, they're going to use Google anyway in daily life. Now, I know. Sorry, I made a mistake. That's not what I wanted to say, right? So what I wanted to say in my POI was that these people will use Google, that's true. But when you talk about the specific queries, when they're talking about minority, right? They're talking about specific queries. When they're talking about, for example, immigrants issue, those people could be scared of going into the discussion in specific queries because they know there might be a possibility to offensive remarks that they does not like exist. So these people won't be able to go inside and make comments on them. That's clear harm. Second, they told us, well, people don't realize whether Google is deleting one thing or not. Well, firstly, I think there are some people who look at a page, right? And if certain page was deleted, that person can make a comment query that why Google did you delete the page for no matter reasons, then people can actually realize it. And if the Google thinks that's a problem, afraid of criticism, they won't. Secondly, he told us, well, people don't upload the information or make any comments because they know that Google will delete it. No, because no one knows what is the precise description or the rules that Google are going to delete the information on what occasion or not, right? So I think the possibility is people are going to upload it if they've been deleted, that's fine. But I think they're trying the possibility that the comment is not going to be deleted. Not yet. Second, their benefit was in terms of expression is that, well, that exists for like education and those kind of things. If other people may be able to persuade people to the conservative saying liberal views is going to be better. Firstly, that argument is not mutually exclusive because in order to tell people that discrimination or idea about like minority should exist, in order to tell those people, you don't have to make a discriminatory, offensive comment on this, right? You can just say, come on, we should make a focus on this idea of ideology or immigrants or whatsoever, and then you can just try to persuade people by saying, you know what, guys, there's a problem of immigration and we should be nice to those people, and there are three reasons why, right? People can be convinced even without the existence of negative images on the status quo. I'm like, fine, people can look at it, that's the point, right? You don't have to see, but people being bullied to see the comment on there, that's the point. Not yet. Second. What was it? Yes, go.
Okay, you're just assuming that the minority want to go away from the forum. But the problem is you're letting Google, not the minority themselves, delete the content, even though some of the minorities want to confront and fight against those like, discriminatory offensive remarks because that's their own problem. Like, how is it justified?
Firstly, if you are so strong and like you want to change the people's opinion, like go to the Fox News and argue them that you're doing something wrong, right? There are some people who just literally do not want to see information that has been going on peaceful discourses. And regardless of whatever you do, right, it's not you decide, it's what Google should decide what kind of information should be given and what kind of discourse should be given in a status quo. So let's look at the second idea. Is it justifiable coercing? So proposition just kept saying that free speech is important. Firstly, they didn't pretty much analyze or give any foundational logic why free speech is something absolute that goes to the extent that we should limit the corporate right, right? Well, given that we're not saying that free speech is not important, we agree to it, but we also have to give a certain respect to corporate rights. That's why we think, well, in some of the cases, people can make a pretty much amount of the comment they want to make, but we think it is also important to respect the right of corporation to decide what kind of ideology they're going to have, what kind of the way the services they're going to manipulate, what kind of the services they're going to provide to societies. And we think it is legitimate when the Google or other kind of search engine thinks that this is a certain kind of discourse, a certain kind of comment that we want to see in this query or in certain web pages, and we think is they are allowed to dictate it. And they just keep saying that free speech is important, but they have to tell us why this marginal increase of free speech is such an important thing to prohibit the Google's right, like take away all the rights of Google to make any manipulation on the page. So we think that comparison makes no sense. Just keep saying that this is like a public forum. Well, just because lots of people are commenting does not mean it's a public forum, right? That is still on the page that Google owns and where Google controls and Google manages. That is within the property right of Google, and how to manage is being decided by the power of Google, right? So we think that is obvious, and they have to tell us why free speech goes to the extent that we should prohibit it. He told us, no, it's the societies that decide discourse. Well, come on, Googles are also allowed to make a formulation or the way how the community should be decided, right? Google is also part of the society that decide how expression and communication should be dealt, and they also have a right what kind of society and discourse that they want to have in societies, and therefore, why you should take away the Google's right to manipulate or make a way how discourse should be made by encouraging other people's way of discourse, right? We think, given that Google is also part of society, though they're private, should also have a right to decide what kind of expression they want to make, what kind of competition they want to make. That's what it is.
Thank you, opposition. I call up last speaker from the opposition side, THBT.
Limiting the corporate right, and it also sacrifices the people, the minorities who see those comments and like immediately get those mental harm, and also the corporate right, then we don't see any reason to vote for the government side. So let me look at the goals of the government one by one, right? Firstly, they said that the people can put together many ideas and form a better idea. However, we have already shown you with the scenarios and the illustrations what will happen when people see those very extremely offensive comments. So the process is unclear. And secondly, the second speaker mainly talked about how the majority can notice the problem and refute those people who are being so offensive, right? But however, we have shown you that there are many alternatives in achieving this. For example, on other platforms or other media, and it doesn't have. And also, when you look at the sacrifices of this very small benefit, for example, the people who, millions of people who see it on top when they search for example, immigration policy, and the first thing they see is don't come to America and stuff like that. We do not have to sacrifice all of those people because, like our opposition would talk about, these educated purposes can be achieved in other forms. But thirdly, so the last thing that is remaining on their side is what we've talked about, right? Any moral value should have a chance to be heard, right? But freedom of speech is being protected under the state. The minimum freedom of speech is already protected under our side too, right? Because you can write those comments on the queries and the web pages, right? But it doesn't mean that other members, including the people, individuals, and the corporations who are private members of society, need to comply with your idea and help you spread that idea to the rest of society, right? So they are confusing these two things, you being able to speak out and you being able to force other people to spread your idea to other parts of society. That is the point given by our side continuously, right? So let's look at the idea that the Google is still a private corporation. The government is demanding Google to take up the role of public, almost like the state, right? Any members of society standing up for certain value can influence others. We don't see the clear line between why Google is just, when it's still as private the right of corporation can be limited, we still do not see where is the line of this influence and when it can be limited, right? And also, the Google does not have the responsibility to ensure the platform for every single citizen to say their every opinion, right? Yes, they should provide more information, and that's how they advertise themselves. However, the target of this advertisement are the people that Google wants to target because it's a private company, right? Google has no obligation to comply with the compromise the way that the company presents its value, or to endure those burdens when only a small part of the consumers that use Google want to make those very extremely offensive comments and are driving away and scaring away the other customers. The Google do not have any responsibility to comply with those people, right? And also, like, even if some portion of the minority want to confront those ideas on public platforms, many more minorities do not want to see those kind of offensive comments in the first place. That is what leader of opposition talked about, right? So at the end of the day, we don't believe that Google is responsible for every single discourse happening in society. And secondly, Google is not responsible for giving everyone the platform to speak out their opinions and be heard to so many people, because we do not think that every opinion is worth hearing from the perspective of Google. So at the end of the day, we don't see a very necessity of the listening, and Google compromising its value to give the platform for people to listen to that small portion of the people. So that is why we want to protect the minorities who are going to be heard and the corporate rights of Google. That's why we're very proud to be.
Thank you, the grass speaker from the grass speaker from the comment side.
I'm going to base my reply speech basically on the only 2 points the opposition has really talked to you about today. They only talked about, first of all, corporate rights, and secondly, they only talked about the harm to minorities. So first of all, let's go on to corporate rights. Now, why do they already fail in their own logic on this? Because the idea was, first of all, they had a very circular logic kind from LO and DLO. This is a corporate right because it's a corporate right and we can't violate it. There needs to be a logic exactly as to why this is a corporate right and why it should be valued, considering there was no analysis from LO and DLO that already falls, right? But furthermore, what did the whip speaker do today? He said it's a corporate right because Google has a right to say their own opinion. We haven't denied that to you in any way from Gov's side, right? Google, we still gonna allow Google to, for example, give their public statements, right, which they do very often. And if it's on that Google forum where it says Google's blog, Google's forum, we are very happy to do it because it's in their own private vicinity. It's within their own private corporation, right? But search results are by nature something very different. Because when you do type in like cat videos on Google, you aren't actually looking for what Google is preferring. You're not going within that private corporation, right? You're looking more at a broader public forum. You are looking at broader other corporations, other opinions, and therefore when it comes to search results, that is not within Google's private vicinity, and therefore because of that, it is not within their corporate rights. But further, what the wit speaker wanted to kind of like shape to you was the idea that all of our arguments are based upon free speech, right? We told you that they aren't, right? We gave you many examples when even what's a private right, even if it's a private corporation, as a public sphere and as a government, we oftentimes interfere upon that. And the biggest example that we gave was things like transportation, like JR, and like, for example, taxi services, right? Where they do have private rights to control their taxis, but they are always under the law of, for example, that government and what they believe is deemed as best. We thought that because of that, because they always lost the whole nuance of that, and then there was really no logic to why this is a corporate right. Their idea about, oh my god, it's a corporate right, is not going to stand. So secondly, let's look at the harms that they have accused us of. There was only one main harm here. It's the idea that minorities are going to cry and they're going to get hurt. So there's going to be 2 actors in this because we divided by the laws of that certain country. First of all, in the countries where there are hate speech laws, right? In the case that there are hate speech laws, we told you that those ideas that are very extreme, that they said were so hurtful, are going to be censored, and those that are moderate, as they said, will have a check and balance system. But secondly, in those without hate speech laws, right, is the main criteria here. In those cases, we need to ask, how can those minorities best deal with these cases of hate speeches? Because if there are no hate speech laws, they're going to have to deal with these very hateful comments, not only on Google search engines, but in their everyday lives, through the mass media, right? So we need to ask ourselves, how exactly can we help those very small minorities stand up for themselves, actually be able to garner themselves for the harms that will happen because of that? We told you that can only happen when they can access and see those kinds of opinions through very, very easy ways, like through a computer screen, and actually be able to build that maybe towards those kinds of hate speech laws, right? But furthermore, we told you that we are the ones who could provide them with more protection, right? Why? Because we think that the best way to actually help these small minorities is to actually lessen the amount of people who say these very bigoted sentiments, to actually be able to neutralize those kinds of ideas, right? That can only happen when liberals are able to attack these people. The problem is that yes, as we can see, there are forums for this, but there are a very small amount of liberals who will go out of their way to search up very conservative websites, right? However, if it is at the top of your Google search page, a large, vast majority of liberals can come up, click on it, and say to them that you are wrong, you need to change your ideas because that is hurting other people. That can only happen, and those people can only change ideas, but a large, vast majority and a large amount of liberals can actually access and see those kinds of search and those kinds of forums. And that can only happen when it's at the top and not filtered through by Google. At the end of the day, there was